Jack Miller wiped the sweat from his forehead as he tightened the last bolt on a rusty pickup truck. The sun was beginning its slow descent behind the rows of buildings, casting long shadows across the parking lot of Grayson Auto Repair. It was almost closing time, and Jack was looking forward to heading home for a quiet evening. He had spent the entire day fixing engines, replacing tires, and dealing with grumpy customers who seemed more interested in complaining than appreciating his hard work. The shop wasn't much. A small, weathered building tucked between a laundromat and a diner, but it was where Jack had worked for nearly 5 years. His boss, Carl Grayson, ran the place with an iron fist. Carl was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a perpetual scowl etched onto his face. He cared about two things: making money and keeping his customers happy, at least the ones who paid. Well, to Carl, every second counted, and if you weren't bringing in cash, you were wasting his time. As Jack gathered his tools and prepared to lock up for the night, he heard a faint clinking sound coming from outside. Curious, he stepped out of the garage and saw an elderly woman struggling with a battered old bicycle. Its chain had slipped off, and she was trying unsuccessfully to fix it herself. She wore a faded floral dress and carried a worn leather handbag slung over her shoulder. Her silver hair shimmered softly under the golden glow of the setting sun. "Excuse me?" she said, noticing Jack watching her. "Do you think you could help me? I'm afraid I've made quite a mess of this." Her voice was gentle but tinged with frustration. Jack hesitated for a moment. He knew Carl wouldn't approve of him helping someone for free, especially after hours. But something about the woman's kind eyes and polite demeanor tugged at him. He couldn't just walk away. "Sure, ma'am," he replied with a warm smile. "Let me take a look." He grabbed his toolbox from inside the garage and knelt beside the bike. Within minutes, he identified the problem. The chain wasn't properly aligned, and one of the gears was slightly bent. It wasn't a complicated repair, but it would require some effort. As he worked, the woman introduced herself. "My name is Margaret Lewis," she said, offering a shy smile. "I didn't mean to bother you, but this bike is my only way of getting around these days." "No trouble at all, Mrs. Lewis," Jack assured her. "It'll just take a few minutes." Margaret watched quietly as Jack expertly adjusted the chain and straightened the gear. His hands moved swiftly and his focus was unwavering. Despite the simplicity of the task, there was a sense of care in the way he handled the tools, as though every movement mattered. "You're very good at what you do," Margaret remarked after a while. "I imagine your boss must be proud to have someone like you working for him." Jack chuckled softly but didn't respond. Truthfully, Carl rarely acknowledged his efforts unless they directly benefited the shop. Still, Jack loved his job. There was something satisfying about solving problems and seeing the immediate results of his labor. Plus, he enjoyed helping people, something Carl didn't always understand. When Jack finally stood up and handed the repaired bike back to Margaret, she beamed with gratitude. "Thank you so much, young man. You've saved me a great deal of trouble." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small tin foil-wrapped package. "Here, please take this. It's not much, but I baked them myself." Jack shook his head politely. "That's really kind of you, Mrs. Lewis, but I can't accept payment for something so simple," Margaret insisted, pressing the package into his hands. "Please, it's the least I can do. And besides, kindness deserves to be rewarded." Reluctantly, Jack accepted the gift, touched by her thoughtfulness. "Well, thank you," he said sincerely. "Be careful riding home now." With that, Margaret climbed onto her bike and pedaled away, waving goodbye as she disappeared down the street. Jack watched her go, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. Helping others always gave him a sense of purpose, even when no one else noticed. Little did Jack know, however, that this seemingly ordinary act of generosity would set off a chain reaction he could never have anticipated. As he turned back toward the garage to finish cleaning up, he failed to notice a figure watching him from the shadows. The same mechanic who had reported him months ago for taking too long on a job. This time, the man smirked knowingly, already, planning to use Jack's kindness against him. By the time Jack locked up the shop and headed home, he had no idea that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. What started as a simple act of compassion would soon spiral into something far greater, affecting not only him but also those around him in unexpected ways. The next morning, Jack arrived at the garage early as he always did. He liked to start his day before the chaos of customers and deadlines took over. The air was crisp and the streets were still quiet, save for the occasional car passing by. As he unlocked the door and flipped on the lights, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in the work he did. Fixing things, whether it was a broken-down car or an old lady's bike, gave him purpose. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. But today, something felt different. The moment Jack stepped inside, he noticed Carl Grayson pacing near the front desk. His arms were crossed tightly over his chest and his face was flushed with anger. Jack froze for a second, sensing that something was wrong. Carl rarely came in this early unless there was trouble brewing. "Jack," Carl barked, pointing a finger at him. "Get over here." Jack hesitated, then walked toward his boss, trying to keep his expression neutral. "What's up, Carl?" he asked cautiously. Carl didn't answer right away. Instead, he glared at Jack, his jaw clenched, so tightly it looked like it might crack. Finally, he spoke, his voice sharp and cutting. "I heard about what you did yesterday, helping that old woman with her bike after hours. Is that true?" Jack swallowed hard but nodded. There was no point in denying it. "Yeah, I helped her. Her bike chain slipped off and she needed a hand. It only took a few minutes." "That's not the point," Carl interrupted, slamming his palm down on the counter. The sound echoed through the empty garage, making Jack flinch. "You think I pay you to waste your time fixing bikes for strangers? This isn't a charity. Every minute you spend doing unpaid work is money out of my pocket." Jack opened his mouth to defend himself, but Carl cut him off again. "And don't give me that 'it only took a few minutes' nonsense. If everyone started doing favors on company time, we'd be out of business faster than you can blink." Jack felt his face grow hot with frustration. "It wasn't during company time, Carl. I was already done for the day. And besides, it wasn't exactly a favor. It was just the right thing to do." "The right thing to do?" Carl repeated mockingly. "Let me tell you something, Jack. In this world, nobody cares about the right thing. All they care about is results and profits. You're here to fix cars, not play hero to every person who walks in off the street." Jack clenched his fists, struggling to keep his temper in check. He wanted to argue, to explain that helping people wasn't a waste of time, that it made a difference even if it didn't show up on a balance sheet. But he knew it wouldn't matter. Carl wasn't the kind of man who listened to reason when he was angry. "You're fired," Carl said abruptly, his tone cold and final. "Pack your stuff and get out." For a moment, Jack stood there, stunned. He hadn't expected this. Sure, Carl could be harsh, but firing someone over such a small act of kindness seemed extreme, even for him. "Wait," Jack stammered. "You're serious? You're firing me because I fixed a bike?" "It's not about the bike," Carl snapped. "It's about respect. You disrespected me in this business. Now get out before I call the cops." Jack didn't move. He couldn't believe what was happening. After 5 years of loyal service, countless late nights, and endless repairs, this was how it ended, for helping an elderly woman. The unfairness of it burned deep inside him, but he knew arguing would only make things worse. Slowly he turned and began gathering his belongings, his toolbox, a few personal items from his locker, and the tin foil-wrapped cookies Margaret had given him the day before. As he packed, the other mechanics avoided eye contact, pretending not to notice the tension in the room. Jack knew they wouldn't stand up for him. Most of them were too afraid of Carl to risk rocking the boat. Even Mike, one of the newer guys who had reported him, kept his distance, looking guilty but saying nothing. When Jack finally finished, he slung his bag over his shoulder and walked toward the exit. Just as he reached the door, Carl called out, "Good luck finding another job, Jack. No one wants a mechanic who doesn't follow orders." Jack stopped in his tracks. For a brief second, he considered turning around and giving Carl a piece of his mind. But instead, he took a deep breath, pushed open the door, and stepped outside. The fresh air hit him like a wave, clearing some of the anger from his chest. Still, the weight of what had just happened pressed heavily on his shoulders. Unbeknownst to Jack, Margaret Lewis had been watching the entire scene unfold from across the street. She had returned to the shop that morning to thank Jack again and maybe bring him a fresh batch of cookies. What she saw instead broke her heart. Through the window, she witnessed Carl's tirade and watched as Jack left the shop, defeated and humiliated. Margaret shook her head in disbelief. She had always believed in treating others with kindness and respect, but Carl's behavior was the exact opposite. It reminded her of why she preferred living a modest life, despite her family's wealth. People like Carl cared only about power and profit, never stopping to consider the impact of their actions on others. Determined to do something about it, Margaret pulled out her phone and dialed a number. After a few rings, a familiar voice answered. "Hello, Grandma," the voice said warmly. "What's going on?" "Ethan, dear," Margaret began, her tone serious. "I need your help with something. It's important." On the other end of the line, Ethan Lewis sat up straighter. His grandmother rarely called him unless it was urgent. "Of course, Grandma. What is it?" Margaret explained everything. Jack's kindness, Carl's cruelty, and the injustice of the situation. By the time she finished, Ethan was fuming. Like his grandmother, he valued integrity and fairness, and hearing about Carl's behavior infuriated him. "Don't worry, Grandma," Ethan said firmly. "I'll take care of it. No one treats good people like that and gets away with it." Margaret smiled, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. "Thank you, Ethan. I knew I could count on you." As Margaret hung up the phone, she glanced back at the garage one last time. Though she couldn't see Jack anymore, she hoped he knew that his act of kindness hadn't gone unnoticed. Sometimes the smallest gestures could spark the biggest changes, and Margaret was determined to ensure that Jack's gesture wouldn't be forgotten anytime soon. Meanwhile, Jack trudged home, replaying the events of the morning in his mind. He felt a mix of emotions: anger at Carl, sadness at losing his job, and confusion about what to do next. Despite everything, however, he refused to let bitterness take root. Helping Margaret had been the right thing to do, and he wouldn't regret it. Not ever. Little did Jack know, his story was far from over. Back at the garage, Carl went about his day, oblivious to the storm brewing on the horizon. And somewhere in the city, Ethan Lewis was already putting plans into motion. Plans that would change all their lives forever. Ethan Lewis ended the call with his grandmother and immediately sprang into action. At 34, Ethan was already a successful businessman, known for his sharp mind and relentless drive. He had inherited his late grandfather's knack for strategy and his grandmother's belief in doing what was right. Though he lived a busy life managing multiple companies, family always came first. And when Margaret asked for help, Ethan didn't hesitate. He started by making a few phone calls. Over the years, Ethan had built a wide network of influential contacts, many of whom owed him favors or respected his judgment. Within hours, he had assembled a group of 6 trusted associates, friends, business partners, and industry leaders, all of whom were eager to assist after hearing about Jack's situation. Each person had ties to Carl Grayson's auto repair shop, whether through contracts, partnerships, or investments. Together, they formed a plan that would send a clear message: kindness mattered, and cruelty had consequences. The next morning, Carl woke up feeling unusually smug. Firing Jack had been harsh, but Carl convinced himself it was necessary. In his mind, running a successful business meant making tough decisions, even if they weren't popular. Besides, Jack wasn't irreplaceable. There were plenty of other mechanics out there willing to work for less pay and fewer questions. As Carl sipped his coffee and prepared for the day ahead, he felt confident that things would go back to normal soon enough. But when Carl stepped outside to leave for the garage, he froze in shock. 7 black SUVs were parked bumper to bumper in front of his house, completely blocking his driveway. The vehicles gleamed under the early morning sunlight, their tinted windows hiding whoever or whatever was inside. For a moment, Carl thought he must be dreaming. This kind of thing didn't happen in real life, did it? Before Carl could react, the doors of the SUVs opened simultaneously, and 7 well-dressed men and women stepped out. They moved with purpose, forming a loose semicircle around Carl's front yard. One of them, A tall, broad-shouldered man, in a tailored suit, stepped forward and introduced himself. "Good morning, Mr. Grayson," the man said calmly, though his tone carried an unmistakable edge. "My name is Ethan Lewis. I believe you've met my grandmother, Margaret Lewis." Carl's eyes widened in recognition. Of course he knew who Margaret was. She'd brought her car in for repairs once or twice over the years. But what did she have to do with this bizarre display? What is this?" Carl stammered, gesturing at the SUVs. "Why are you here?" Ethan smiled thinly. "We're here to discuss your recent behavior. Specifically, the way you treated one of your employees, Jack Miller." Carl's face flushed red. "That's none of your business." "Jack broke the rules, and I had every right to fire him." "Did you?" Ethan asked, raising an eyebrow. "Or did you simply punish him for being decent when no one else was watching?" Without waiting for a response, Ethan continued. "You see, Mr. Grayson, we all know how important relationships are in business. Reputation matters. And unfortunately for you, word travels fast. Thanks to my grandmother, several key figures in the community now know exactly how you run your shop, and they're not happy about it." As Ethan spoke, the others nodded in agreement. One by one, they began explaining their roles in Carl's downfall. A woman named Linda Carter revealed that she owned a local fleet service company that regularly sent vehicles to Grayson Auto Repair. She informed Carl that her contract was canceled effective immediately. Another man, Robert Ellis, announced that he was pulling funding for a planned expansion project Carl had been counting on. By the time they finished speaking, Carl realized the full extent of the damage. Nearly all of his major clients and investors were cutting ties with him. But why? Carl sputtered, panic rising in his chest. "This isn't fair. You can't just ruin me because of one employee." "It's not about Jack," Ethan said firmly. "It's about you. You treat people like tools instead of human beings. You value profit over decency. And frankly, no one wants to support someone like that anymore." He paused, letting his words sink in before adding, "There is, however, a way to fix this. Apologize to Jack. Not just any apology, but a sincere one. Offer him his job back, along with a promotion and a raise. Show us that you understand the importance of treating people with respect. If you do that, we might reconsider our decision." Carl stared at Ethan, his mind racing. Part of him wanted to argue, to scream that he didn't need charity from anyone, but deep down, he knew the truth. Without these connections, his business wouldn't survive. Swallowing his pride, Carl nodded reluctantly. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll talk to Jack, but I can't promise he'll forgive me." "That's your problem to solve," Ethan replied coolly. "We'll be watching." With that, the group turned and climbed back into their SUVs, driving away as quickly as they had arrived. Left standing alone in his driveway, Carl felt a mix of emotions: fear, anger, shame. He hated being forced into this position, but he also couldn't deny that he deserved it. Over the years, he had made countless enemies by prioritizing money over morality. Now those choices were catching up with him. Meanwhile, Jack was sitting at home, scrolling through job listings on his laptop. Losing his job had been tough, but he refused to let it break him. He figured he'd find another mechanic position, eventually, even if it took some time. What he didn't expect was a knock at the door later that afternoon. When Jack opened it, he found Carl standing there, looking uncomfortable and awkward. "Can I come in?" Carl asked, gruff key takeaway. Carl's cruel actions lead to losing key clients and investors, forcing him to confront Jack and offer a heartfelt apology to save his business. Jack blinked in surprise when he saw Carl standing on his doorstep. The man looked nothing like the confident, domineering boss Jack had worked for. His shoulders were slumped, his tie was loosened, and his usual scowl was replaced with an expression of unease. For a moment, Jack wondered if this was some kind of trick. "Can I come in?" Carl asked again, his voice quieter than Jack had ever heard it. Hesitating for a second, Jack stepped aside and let him enter. He led Carl to the small living room, where the two men sat across from each other on mismatched furniture. An awkward silence filled the space as Carl fidgeted with his hands, clearly struggling to find the right words. Finally, Carl cleared his throat and spoke. "Look, Jack, I owe you an apology. What I did, firing you over something so small, it was wrong. I let my temper get the better of me, and I didn't think about how unfair it was." Jack crossed his arms, studying Carl carefully. He wasn't sure what to make of this sudden change of heart. "Why now?" he asked bluntly. "Yesterday you were yelling at me and calling me ungrateful. What's different today?" Carl sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "A lot has changed since then. Some very important people, well, they've decided they don't want to work with me anymore because of how I treated you. And honestly, I can't blame them. I've been too focused on profits and not enough on people. That's my fault." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Important people? Like who?" Carl hesitated before answering. "Margaret Lewis, for one. Turns out she's related to someone pretty powerful, a guy named Ethan Lewis. He and his friends showed up at my house this morning with a message: fix things with you, or lose everything." At the mention of Margaret, Jack's eyes widened. So that's why Carl was here. It wasn't just guilt driving him, it was desperation. Still, Jack couldn't ignore the sincerity in Carl's tone. Even if the apology was forced, it seemed genuine enough. "I see," Jack said slowly. "So you're only apologizing because your business is falling apart." "That's part of it," Carl admitted. "But not all of it. You didn't deserve to be fired, Jack. You're a good mechanic and you've always done your job well. Firing you was a mistake, and I'm sorry for that." He paused, then added, "I'd like to offer you your job back. Not just as a mechanic, but as head mechanic. You'll have more responsibility, better pay, and a say in how things are run around here." Jack leaned back in his chair, processing everything Carl had said. On one hand, he wanted to turn down the offer outright. After all, Carl had humiliated him in front of everyone and shown no regard for his feelings. But on the other hand, Jack loved working with cars, and the idea of leading the team appealed to him. Besides, if he accepted, maybe he could use the opportunity to create positive change within the shop. After a long pause, Jack finally spoke. "If I agree to come back, things will have to be different. No more cutting corners or treating employees like machines. People need to feel respected and valued, or they won't stick around. Can you promise me that?" Carl nodded earnestly. "Absolutely. I've learned my lesson, Jack. If I don't start treating people right, I'll lose more than just customers. I'll lose my reputation too." "And you'll give me full authority over hiring and firing decisions?" Jack pressed. "No, interference from you unless it's absolutely necessary." "Yes," Carl agreed without hesitation. "You'll have complete control over the staff. Just, please, Jack, give me another chance." Jack studied Carl for a moment longer, searching for any sign of deception. All he saw was vulnerability and regret. Finally, he extended his hand. "All right, Carl, I'll come back, but only because I believe in second chances. Don't make me regret this." Carl shook Jack's hand firmly, relief washing over his face. "Thank you, Jack. You won't regret it, I promise." Over the next few weeks, Jack returned to Grayson Auto Repair and began implementing changes. Under his leadership, the atmosphere in the shop transformed. Employees felt more appreciated and motivated, knowing their opinions mattered. Jack encouraged open communication and made sure everyone understood their value to the team. Slowly but surely, morale improved, and productivity soared. Word of the shop's turnaround spread quickly, thanks in part to Ethan and his associates, who reinstated their support once they saw Carl making an effort to change. Business picked up again, and new clients started coming in, impressed by the shop's renewed focus on quality and customer service. Margaret visited the shop one afternoon to personally thank Jack for inspiring such a positive shift. She brought along a fresh batch of cookies and a warm smile. "You've done wonderful work here, Jack," she said proudly. "My grandson told me all about it. I'm so glad we could help." Jack grinned, feeling a sense of pride he hadn't experienced in years. "Thank you, Mrs. Lewis. None of this would have happened without your kindness and your grandson's persistence. As they chatted, Margaret mentioned that her late husband had always believed in empowering others to achieve greatness. He used to say that true success isn't measured by wealth or power, but by the impact you have on the world around you, she explained. You remind me of him, Jack. You have a gift for bringing out the best in people. Her words struck a chord deep within Jack. For the first time, he allowed himself to dream bigger. Maybe someday, he thought, he could open his own repair shop, one that prioritized community and compassion above all else. Meanwhile, Carl worked hard to rebuild trust with both his employees and his clients. Though it wasn't easy, he gradually became a better leader, learning to listen and show appreciation where it was due. He even started volunteering at a local charity, something he never would have considered before. While he still had moments of frustration, he was determined to keep growing and improving. One evening, as Jack locked up the shop after a long day, Carl approached him with a rare smile. Just wanted to say thanks again, Jack. Without you, none of this would have been possible. Jack returned the smile, feeling a sense of satisfaction. We're a team, Carl. Together, we can do great things. And for the first time in a long while, Jack truly believed it. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would take him farther than he ever imagined. Months passed, and Grayson Auto Repair became almost unrecognizable from the place it had once been. Under Jack's leadership, the shop thrived in ways Carl could never have imagined. The employees were happier, the work was more efficient, and customers kept coming back, not just for the quality repairs but also for the friendly atmosphere. Word of mouth spread like wildfire, and soon the shop was busier than ever. Jack took his role as head mechanic seriously. He didn't just fix cars, he fixed problems within the team. When disagreements arose, he listened to both sides and found fair solutions. When someone struggled with a task, he offered guidance instead of criticism. His approach earned him respect not only from his coworkers, but also from Carl, who often marveled at how much smoother things ran under Jack's watch. Margaret continued to visit occasionally, bringing cookies or simply stopping by to chat. She loved seeing the positive changes Jack had brought to the shop. During one of her visits, she noticed a bulletin board near the break room covered in photos and notes. Some were thank you letters from satisfied customers, while others were snapshots of the staff celebrating milestones, birthdays, promotions, even a wedding proposal that had happened right in the parking lot. "What's this?" Margaret asked, pointing to the board. "That's our wall of gratitude," Jack explained with a smile. "It's a way to remind everyone why we do what we do. Fixing cars is important, sure, but helping people, that's what really matters." Margaret's eyes lit up. "You know, Richard would have loved this. He always said success isn't about money. It's about making a difference." Her words stuck with Jack long after she left. They stirred something inside him, a dream he'd pushed aside for years. What if he could take this idea further? What if he opened his own repair shop, one that focused not just on fixing vehicles but on serving the community? The thought stayed with him, growing stronger each day. He started sketching plans during his lunch breaks and researching locations in the evenings. It wouldn't be easy. Opening a business required capital, connections, and courage, but Jack felt ready to try. After everything he'd been through, he knew he couldn't let fear hold him back. One Saturday afternoon, Jack decided to share his idea with Margaret. She had become a kind of mentor to him, offering wisdom and encouragement whenever he needed it. He invited her to a small diner near the shop where they sat in a quiet corner booth sipping coffee. "I've been thinking," Jack began hesitantly, "about starting my own repair shop." Margaret's face brightened immediately. "That's wonderful, Jack. Tell me more." "Well," Jack continued, leaning forward, "I want it to be different from other places. A shop where anyone can come, no matter their budget. Maybe we could offer free services one day a week for people who can't afford repairs. And I'd like to hire kids from the neighborhood, teach them skills they can use later in life." Margaret nodded enthusiastically. "It sounds perfect. You have such a big heart, Jack. This is exactly the kind of thing Richard believed in." But there's a problem, Jack admitted, his voice tinged with doubt. I don't have enough money to get started. Even if I save every penny, it'll take years. Margaret smiled knowingly. Leave that part to me. I may not look like much, but I still have resources and friends who owe me favors. Let me talk to Ethan. Between us, I'm sure we can find a way to make this happen. Jack felt a surge of gratitude. Thank you, Mrs. Lewis. I can't tell you how much this means to me. Nonsense, Margaret replied with a wave of her hand. You've already done so much for others. Now it's time someone did something for you. True to her word, Margaret reached out to Ethan, who wasted no time getting involved. Within days, he arranged a meeting with a group of investors interested in supporting local businesses. Jack presented his vision passionately, explaining how his shop would give back to the community. By the end of the meeting, the investors were convinced. They agreed to fund the project, impressed not only by Jack's ideas, but also by his character. With the financial backing secured, Jack threw himself into preparing for the grand opening. He found a vacant building on the edge of town, a former gas station that needed some work but had plenty of potential. He spent weeks renovating the space, painting walls, installing equipment, and designing a welcoming waiting area. He named the shop Miller's Community Garage, a nod to his family and his mission. Carl heard about Jack's new venture and stopped by one afternoon to see the progress. As he walked through the half-finished space, he couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and envy. Pride because Jack had come so far, and envy because he wished he'd thought of something like this himself. You're really doing it, huh? Carl said, looking around. This place is going to be amazing. Thanks, Carl, Jack replied, smiling. I couldn't have done it without your support, or without the lessons I learned at your shop. Carl chuckled nervously. Yeah, well, maybe I should take a page from your book. Maybe it's time I gave back too. Jack clapped him on the shoulder. It's never too late to start. Finally, the day of the grand opening arrived. The street outside Miller's Community Garage was lined with balloons and banners, and a small crowd gathered to celebrate. Friends, family, former co-workers, and even strangers showed up to show their support. Margaret and Ethan stood near, the entrance beaming with pride as Jack cut the ribbon. Inside, the shop buzzed with energy. Kids played games in a designated corner while parents browsed informational pamphlets about car maintenance. Volunteers handed out free snacks and drinks, and a local band provided live music. For the first hour, Jack moved from person to person, shaking hands and thanking everyone for coming. As the day wore on, Margaret pulled Jack aside for a quiet moment. You've done it, Jack, she said, her eyes glistening with tears. This is everything Richard dreamed of, a place that brings people together. Jack hugged her tightly, overwhelmed with emotion. I couldn't have done it without you, Mrs. Lewis. Thank you for believing in me. Margaret patted his back affectionately. Believing in you was easy. You're one of the good ones, Jack. Never forget that. Later that evening, as the last guests trickled out and the cleanup began, Jack stood in the middle of the garage, taking it all in. The sound of laughter still lingered in the air, mingling with the faint smell of fresh paint and motor oil. For the first time in his life, he felt truly fulfilled. Not because of the shop itself, but because of what it represented. Kindness, community, and second chances. He glanced at the bulletin board he'd set up near the register, already filled, with notes from grateful visitors. At the top, written in bold letters, was a quote Margaret had suggested. Success is measured not by what you gain, but by what you give. Jack smiled to himself, knowing those words would guide him for years to come. Little did he know, his journey was far from over. With Margaret and Ethan's continued support, he planned to expand the shop's outreach programs, partner with schools to train young mechanics, and host events that brought neighbors closer together. As he locked up for the night and stepped outside, Jack looked up at the stars. He felt a deep sense of peace, knowing he was exactly where he was meant to be. The road ahead might be challenging, but he was ready. After all, he'd already proven that even the smallest acts of kindness could spark monumental change, and, as he walked home under the vast night sky, Jack knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. A year had passed since the grand opening of Miller's Community Garage, and Jack could hardly believe how much his life had changed. What started as a simple dream, a place where people could feel valued and supported, had grown into something far greater than he ever imagined. The garage wasn't just a repair shop anymore. It was the heart of the community. Every Saturday morning, families would line up outside for Free Fix Day, when Jack and his team offered complimentary repairs to those in need. Single parents struggling to make ends meet, elderly neighbors, whose cars were their lifelines, and even young adults saving up for college all benefited from the program. The gratitude in their eyes reminded Jack why he had started this journey in the first place. Inside the shop, things ran like clockwork. Jack had hired a diverse group of employees, including several teenagers from the neighborhood who were eager to learn a trade. He taught them not only how to fix engines, but also how to treat customers with respect and care. Many of these kids went on to pursue careers in mechanics or engineering, crediting Jack for giving them a chance when no one else would. Margaret remained a constant presence at the garage, often stopping by with fresh-baked treats or stories about her late husband, Richard. She loved watching Jack's vision come to life, seeing firsthand the impact it had on the community. Ethan, too, visited occasionally, bringing new ideas and connections that helped the shop grow. Together they formed an unlikely trio, a kind-hearted mechanic, a wise widow, and a driven businessman, all united by a shared belief in doing good. But while Jack's success brought joy, it also attracted attention, some of it unwelcome. One afternoon, as Jack worked under the hood of a beat-up sedan, a man walked into the shop. He wore a sharp suit and carried a leather briefcase looking entirely out of place among the grease-stained overalls and scattered tools. "Mr. Miller?" the man asked, approaching cautiously. Jack wiped his hands on a rag and turned to face him. "That's me. How can I help you?" The man introduced himself as Daniel Harper, a representative from a large automotive chain looking to expand into the area. "We've been following your work here," Daniel said smoothly. "Your reputation is impressive. We'd like to offer you a partnership." Jack frowned, unsure where this was going. "A partnership? What does that mean exactly?" Daniel smiled confidently. "It means we buy your shop, rebrand it, and bring in our resources. You'd still run the day-to-day operations, but with access to better equipment, training programs, and marketing support. Think of it as taking your business to the next level." At first glance, the offer seemed tempting. More resources meant Jack could help even more people, but something about it didn't sit right with him. He glanced around the garage, at the bulletin board covered in thank you notes, at the kids tinkering with old parts in the corner, at the customers chatting cheerfully in the waiting area. This wasn't just a business. It was a family. Selling out would change everything. "I appreciate the offer," Jack said slowly, "but I don't think it's the right fit for us. My goal has always been to serve the community, not turn a profit. If we partnered with your company, I'm afraid we'd lose sight of what makes this place special." Daniel's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "I understand your concerns, Mr. Miller. However, imagine the difference you could make with our backing. Bigger reach, more influence. It's hard to argue against that." Jack shook his head firmly. "No offense, Mr. Harper, but my answer is no. We're happy with what we've built here. Money isn't everything." Daniel nodded curtly, clearly disappointed but unwilling to push any further. "Very well. If you change your mind, don't hesitate to reach out." With that, he left, leaving behind a faint scent of cologne and a lingering sense of unease. Later that evening, Jack shared the encounter with Margaret and Ethan during one of their regular dinners at the diner. Both listened intently, exchanging knowing glances. "They'll be back," Ethan said matter-of-factly. "Big companies like that don't take no lightly. They'll try again, and they'll probably come with bigger offers." Margaret reached across the table and patted Jack's hand. "You did the right thing, dear. Staying true to your values is more important than anything they could offer." Jack sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I know. It's just frustrating, you know? Sometimes it feels like there's so much pressure to grow, to expand, to keep up with everyone else. But I don't want to lose what makes this place unique. You won't, Ethan assured him. As long as you stay focused on your mission, nothing can stop you. Besides, you've got us and the entire community behind you. The reminder lifted Jack's spirits. He realized that success wasn't measured by size or wealth, but by the lives touched along the way. And if staying small meant preserving the soul of the garage, then so be it. In the months that followed, Jack doubled down on his commitment to the community. He launched a series of workshops teaching basic car maintenance skills to local residents, empowering them to handle minor repairs themselves. He partnered with schools to create internship programs, giving students real-world experience in the field. He even organized a charity drive, collecting donations to provide free winter tires for low-income families. Word of these initiatives spread beyond the town, drawing attention from news outlets and social media platforms. Articles praising Jack's efforts appeared online, and videos of the garage's activities gained thousands of views. Strangers from across the country reached out, asking for advice on starting similar projects in their own communities. Through it all, Jack stayed humble. He credited his success to the people around him, the employees who worked tirelessly, the customers who trusted him, and especially Margaret and Ethan, whose guidance had been invaluable. He knew none of this would have been possible without their support. One crisp autumn morning, as Jack stood outside the garage watching the sunrise, he reflected on how far he'd come. From being fired for helping an elderly woman fix her bike to building a thriving hub of kindness and generosity, his journey had been anything but ordinary. Yet every step felt purposeful, as though it had led him exactly where he was meant to be. Margaret joined him a few minutes later, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" she said, handing him one of the cups. "It is," Jack agreed, taking a sip. "Thank you, Mrs. Lewis, for everything. I couldn't have done this without you." Margaret chuckled softly. "Oh, Jack, you give me too much credit. You're the one who made this happen. All I did was remind you of what you already knew, that kindness matters." They stood in comfortable silence, watching as the sky turned shades of pink and gold. In that moment, Jack felt a profound sense of peace. Life hadn't always been easy, but he'd learned that challenges could lead to unexpected opportunities. By staying true to himself and prioritizing others, he'd created something truly meaningful. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, signaling the start of another busy day, Jack turned to Margaret with a grin. "Ready to see what today brings?" She smiled back warmly. "Always, dear, always." And with that, they headed inside, ready to face whatever lay ahead, together.